Hey everyone, welcome back to I Dare You Sleep. I know a lot of you love to fall asleep to these creepy stories, but before you do, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from around the world. And if you're enjoying the thrills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and see if you can make it through without losing any sleep.
Every year, on Halloween night, our small town holds a grand parade. Brightly lit jack-o'-lanterns are displayed everywhere. Houses are decorated with cobwebs, skeletons, and eerie fake monsters. But this year, my three best friends, Sarah, Mike, and Quinn, and I decided to do something different. We had heard countless stories about house number 13 at the end of the old street, a place no one dared to approach because of rumors that it was haunted. The house had been abandoned for years, isolated between a desolate field and a small patch of woods. Locals said that many years ago, a wealthy family lived there, but after one Halloween night, they mysteriously vanished, leaving behind the eerie, abandoned house. Since then, people claimed that on Halloween night, strange lights would flicker inside the house, and the chilling laughter of children could be heard echoing through the night. We didn't really believe those stories. Sarah was always the adventurous one, and she had come up with the idea for this daring trip. "If there really are ghosts, why don't we go and prove it's all just nonsense?" she said excitedly. We agreed, and at exactly 10 p.m., after the Halloween parade ended, we set out. A cold wind blew through the streets, making Sarah's witch costume flutter in the breeze. Mike, who was always the scared one, tightened his jacket and muttered, "I don't know about this, guys. This feels like a bad idea." House number 13 was even more terrifying than we imagined. It was a large, decaying building with broken windows, walls covered in moss and vines, standing silently under the pitch-black night sky. The atmosphere around it was desolate, with no sound except for the crunch of dried leaves beneath our feet. "Come on, Mike, don't be a coward," Quinn encouraged, patting Mike's shoulder before pushing open the old rusty gate. The creaking sound of the gate echoed through the night, sending a shiver down all of our spine. As we stepped into the front yard, everything around us seemed to still. Our jack-o'-lanterns cast a faint flickering glow, and suddenly, a strange noise came from behind the house. We froze, listening, but there was nothing except the cold wind. "I swear I heard something," Sarah whispered. "It's probably just the wind," Quinn replied, though there was clear unease in his voice. We moved closer to the front door. The rotting wooden door creaked as we gently pushed it open. Inside, the house was pitch black, and the smell of dampness and decay filled the air. A wooden staircase led to the second floor, where closed doors awaited. The stillness was suffocating. Just as we stepped inside, the lights in the house suddenly flickered on. A dim glow, but enough for us to see the old dusty furniture. Everything was still in place, as if the house had been abandoned in a hurry. Mike stood frozen. Guys, the lights came on by themselves. It's probably someone playing a prank. Maybe there's someone else hiding in here," Quinn tried to reassure us. But before we could react, a laugh echoed from upstairs. A child's laugh, but it wasn't joyful. It was cold, eerie, and sent chills down our spines. Sarah instantly grabbed my hand. "We need to get out of here." We all turned to run, but the front door suddenly slammed shut, trapping us inside. Mike frantically tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked. What do we do?" For a moment, panic overtook us all, but then Quinn pointed to the staircase. "We need to go upstairs. Maybe there's a way out through the balcony." Sarah nodded, pulling us up the creaky stairs. The old wood groaned under each step, as if ready to collapse at any moment. The flickering light bulbs above only added to the unsettling atmosphere. When we reached the second floor, we stood before a long hallway lined with several closed doors. But the most terrifying thing was at the end of the hallway. A small, ghostly figure appeared. It was a child, around 6 years old, with tangled hair and a pale white dress. Its hollow, empty eyes stared directly at us, unblinking. We all froze in place, too terrified to move. Sarah, unable to contain her fear, screamed, "Run!" We bolted down the stairs, desperate to escape the haunted house. But just as we reached the first floor, the child was already standing right in front of us as if it had teleported. Mike stumbled and fell to the ground, and in that moment, the eerie, mocking laughter rang out again, this time from all around us. In a frantic rush, we pushed against the front door one more time, and suddenly, it flew open. We all sprinted outside, not daring to look back. Once we were far from the house, we stopped, gasping for breath, our hearts still pounding. No one said a word. We knew we had experienced something that couldn't be explained. House number 13 still stood there, silent and ominous as ever. But one thing was for sure. We would never return to that place on any Halloween night again. On Halloween night, the sky was pitch black, illuminated only by the faint glow of pumpkin lanterns lining the street and the rustling of dry leaves underfoot. Children ran around in their spooky costumes, laughing and shouting as they went door to door for candy. But at the far end of the street, where the lights faded into the darkness, stood an old house, long abandoned. The iron gate groaned with each gust of wind, and the dust-covered windows seemed to watch anyone brave enough to come near. This house had a chilling history. Years ago, a family had moved in. Their only child, a girl named Emily, had a peculiar fondness for dolls. She owned a vast collection, from rag dolls and porcelain dolls to plastic ones. But her favorite was a porcelain doll with blue eyes, golden hair, and a white lace dress. Emily named her Lily. Ever since Emily got Lily, strange things began to happen. Emily would talk to the doll as if it were a real friend. She even insisted that Lily could talk back and move when no one was watching. At first, her parents dismissed it as childish imagination, but soon they started noticing odd occurrences. Furniture seemed to shift places on its own. Eerie giggles echoed through the house at night. And worst of all, Lily would often be found in spots where no one had left her. One stormy night, with thunder crashing and lightning splitting the sky, Emily mysteriously vanished. Her parents searched everywhere, desperate to find her, but she was gone without a trace. The house was left in mourning and fear. Not long after, her parents abandoned the house, leaving behind everything, including Emily's collection of dolls. Years passed, and the house fell into disrepair. People in the village whispered that if you listened closely at night, you could still hear the soft footsteps inside, the faint voice of a little girl, and sometimes the sound of laughter, delicate as a breeze. But no one dared to venture near to find out. This Halloween, a group of friends, Claire, Adam, and James, decided to do something reckless. They had heard the tales of the haunted house and wanted to see for themselves if the rumors were true. "There's nothing to be scared of. It's just an old house," James said loudly as they stood at the rusty gate. Claire hesitated, but Adam, always the fearless one, grabbed her hand and led her into the yard. Stepping inside the house, they were immediately struck by the cold and an eerie silence. The walls were cracked, the pictures faded, and scattered all around were dolls of all kinds, covered in dust, yet somehow still unnervingly lifelike. On the shelf in the center of the living room sat the porcelain doll with blue eyes and a white dress, Lily, sitting as if waiting for something. "That must be the doll they were talking about," Claire said, her voice trembling. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but James, always the joker, laughed and reached out to touch Lily's head. As soon as his hand made contact, the lights in the house flickered and went out, plunging them into complete darkness. Claire screamed, "What did you do, James?" But there was no answer. In the blackness, only the sound of their ragged breathing could be heard. Then, faintly at first, they heard it, a soft giggle, close by, as though someone, or something, was standing right next to them. Claire clutched Adam's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a whisper came from where the doll had been. "Play with me, forever." Adam quickly switched on his flashlight. Its weak beam swept the room. It sat just moments before, but now she was gone. "What the hell is happening?" Adam shouted, scanning the room for James, but he was nowhere to be seen. "We have to get out of here," Claire gasped, pulling Adam toward the door. But when they reached it, the door was locked tight from the outside. They pounded on it, yelling for help, but no one could hear them. The house had trapped them inside, sealing them in with its ghosts. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, and in a terrifying moment, Claire felt something brush against her hand. She turned around, and there she was, Lily, the doll, standing right in front of them, no longer just a lifeless toy. Her face twisted into a grotesque smile, and her bright blue eyes gleamed in the dark. "Play with me, forever," the doll repeated, her voice louder, more menacing this time. Adam and Claire screamed, desperately trying to find another way out. But every window, every door was tightly shut. The soft giggles of the doll echoed around them, and then, without warning, a powerful force yanked Claire backward. Adam barely had time to react as he watched in horror, while a dozen small porcelain hands emerged from the shadows, grabbing Claire and pulling her into a pile of dolls. She was gone in an instant. The last thing Adam saw before the flashlight went out was Claire's terrified face, surrounded by porcelain figures, their cold hands reaching for her. The next morning, The village was quiet, and the house looked the same as it always had, silent, foreboding, and untouched. But what terrified those who dared to look was that on the shelf next to Lily, there were now 2 new dolls, their eyes wide with terror, and one of them was wearing a jacket identical to Claire's. As Halloween approached, the atmosphere in a small village nestled deep in the mountains of Switzerland became especially cold. A thick fog covered the narrow streets, and the nights seemed to stretch endlessly. The village was always quiet, but during this time of year, the silence took on an eerie quality. The locals passed down stories of an ancient curse tied to a wooden house on the outskirts of the village. That old house, with its rotting red-tiled roof and crumbling wooden walls, had once been home to a wealthy family. But on a Halloween night many years ago, the entire family mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Only strange footprints were found, leading from the house into the forest behind it. And since then, no one dared to go near. The villagers whispered that, on Halloween night, if you stood near the house, you could see a strange figure appear behind the window. But no one knew who he was. This year, Alice and her boyfriend, Martin, decided to take a short vacation in the village, seeking peace and quiet after long, stressful days working in the city. They rented a small cottage near the woods, not far from the cursed house. Alice had heard the spooky stories from the villagers, but to her, they were just old legends, nothing worth worrying about. On Halloween night, the sky was pitch black, not a star in sight. The wind howled through the dry branches outside Alice and Martin's cottage. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace created a cozy atmosphere, in stark contrast to the cold outside. Alice sat in a chair by the window, gazing out into the woods, her thoughts drifting to the stories the villagers had told. "Martin, do you think the stories about that abandoned house are true?" Alice asked, half joking, half serious. Martin chuckled, putting his book down. "They're just stories to scare people. Don't think too much about it." Yet Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She stood up, moved closer to the window, and peered out into the darkness. At first, there was nothing but endless black, and the swaying of barren tree branches in the wind. But then, in a fleeting moment, her breath caught in her throat, as she saw a vague figure standing far off, near the cursed house. The figure stood still, as if staring directly at her through the window. She stepped back, her breathing quickened. "Martin, there's someone out there," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. Martin got up, walked to the window, and looked out. But all he saw was the misty dark night. "Are you sure? I don't see anyone," he said, looking at her with doubt. Alice didn't respond, but she was certain of what she had seen. She decided not to mention it again, convincing herself that it must have been her tired mind playing tricks on her. The two of them decided to go to bed early. Late into the night, as the clock approached midnight, Alice was jolted awake by a strange sound. It was a faint tapping, like someone gently knocking on the window. She opened her eyes. The room was pitch dark, with only the faint light from outside casting a soft glow. Her heart began to race. The tapping came again, steady and deliberate, one knock after the other. Trying to stay calm, she turned to wake Martin, but he was still fast asleep. Slowly, she sat up and looked toward the window. This time, there was no mistaking it. A face was standing right outside, staring straight at her. The figure was cloaked in a long black coat, his face obscured by the shadows, but his eyes, bright, soulless, gleamed in the dark. Alice froze, unable to move or scream. The stranger at the window knocked once more, softly but persistently, as if waiting for her to respond. Finally, she found her voice and screamed, "Martin!" Martin shot up instantly, his eyes wide with confusion, as he saw Alice trembling, pointing toward the window. He rushed over, yanked the curtains aside, but there was nothing there, just the blackness of the night and the swirling fog. "Alice, there's no one there. You must have had a nightmare," Martin tried to reassure her. But even he felt something was off. That night, Alice couldn't fall back asleep. She sat upright in bed, her eyes fixed on the window, terrified that the face would reappear. But everything remained still and quiet, with only the sound of the wind rattling the windows. The next morning, as Alice and Martin prepared to leave the cottage and head back to the village, they noticed something strange. On the glass of their bedroom window, there were faint smudges, as though someone had pressed their hands against the outside. The handprints were large and unmistakable. "Alice, you were telling the truth last night," Martin muttered, staring in disbelief at the marks on the window. Someone was out there. No one knew who the stranger was, or why he appeared on Halloween night. The two quickly packed their things and hurried to leave the village as fast as they could. But as they drove past the old cursed house, Alice glanced out the car window, and this time, there was no mistake. Behind the dusty window of the abandoned house, a dark figure stood, his hollow eyes watching them as they passed. And she understood. The stranger at the window wasn't just a legend. He was real, and he waited every Halloween night looking for someone new.